Hey guys, tonight we're going somewhere very old, very cold, and very confused. We're going back to New England in the 1660s, a place where the woods stretch out like a green ocean, the rivers don't always flow where the maps say, and half the people claim the other half don't belong there. You're waking up in a tiny bed in a drafty wooden house. The fire's gone out, and someone outside is probably arguing about taxes, church membership, or who actually owns the pig that wandered through your cabbage patch last night. You probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with your city and local time. I love seeing where in the world we're all falling asleep together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up stiff, cold, and vaguely itchy, surrounded by wood so rough it could splinter your dreams. The ceiling beams above you groan with every winter gust. You sit up on a straw-stuffed mattress that smells faintly of onions and disappointment. Welcome to the mid-17th century. No indoor plumbing, no sugar in your tea, no tea, actually. That's for the rich folks down in Boston. If you're lucky, someone boiled you a broth of bark and salt pork last night. Outside your door, a pale gray dawn creeps in across a village that looks like it gave up halfway through building itself. The houses are made of mismatched boards, daub, and frustration. Smoke curls from a few crooked chimneys. Chickens cluck and protest under a sagging coop. A woman nearby is already yelling at someone to find the axe, which mysteriously disappears every other day. Most likely it's been used to settle a dispute, butcher a hog, or wedge open a frozen door. You shuffle out into the street, or what passes for one, more like a trodden path between cabins, mud churned up from last night's sleet. The air smells like wood smoke, manure, and ambition. And somewhere under that, the deep green note of pine and a hint of brine from the unseen harbor. You pass a man with sunken face and wool cap too big for his head. He nods at you but says nothing. Everyone here knows each other, which means everyone knows each other's business, but not yours. You're a visitor, and that makes you suspicious by default. Best to keep moving. At the edge of town, there's a cluster of men already in discussion. Thick beards, thicker coats. Their words are slow and clipped, like they're afraid to say too much. One is explaining how the Massachusetts Bay authorities plan to collect another tithe next month. Another mentions the governor. Someone spits. There's a name that keeps floating through the air like wood ash. Maverick, Samuel Maverick, a man who built one of the first fortified homes at Winnie-Cemet and somehow got on the wrong side of both the Puritans and the Crown. Historians still argue whether he was a loyal servant of England, a rogue settler with a grudge, or just someone too smart for the colony's own good. He had cannons, big ones, mounted at every angle of his house, not to defend against the natives, some say, but the neighbors. You find a bench and sit near the meeting house. The benches are wet from dew. No one's bothered to fix the thatch roof yet. A boy walks past with an armful of wood firewood, nearly his height. He's maybe 10, barefoot, psalm, or possibly a curse. This isn't wilderness, not anymore, but it's not civilization either. It's an in-between, a half-made place where old laws fight new soil, where the trees still whisper in Algonquin tongues and the rivers forget their names halfway to the sea, and where everyone you meet carries a tool in one hand and a weapon in the other. The minister arrives, gaunt, severe, with a voice like a cracked bell. His sermon begins. It's about obedience, discipline, and sin that smells suspiciously like your neighbor's cooking. He's talking about fences now. Property lines, then he jumps to Babylon, then back to something about tobacco and infidels. Your mind drifts. Someone sitting behind you sneezes and immediately apologizes, not to you, but to God. You decide not to ask. The church bell tolls late, and the echo rolls out over the marsh. You catch the scent of salt in the wind. The harbor's not far, though few dare venture there without reason. Last week, a trader swore he saw Dutch sails out on the horizon. Again, they come sometimes. Or the French, or worse. No one really knows. News travels by rumor and horse, and neither is particularly fast in mud season. You wander away during the closing hymn. No one stops you. The villagers are too busy trying to sing in tune while watching each other for signs of heresy. The meeting ends. The people scatter. A young couple argues quietly near the well. An old man counts barrels. A dog steals a loaf of bread, and nobody bothers to stop it. Later, by a smoky hearth, you find warmth in the home of someone who still hasn't decided whether to trust you. The stew is thin, the bread is hard, but the fire crackles, and for a moment, it almost feels like safety. You sleep on a blanket near the embers. Outside, the wind rattles the door. Somewhere in the forest, an owl calls once. Then silence. You dream of water, black rivers twisting through unfamiliar land, canoes drifting without paddlers, voices calling from the trees, speaking names you've never heard and can't forget. You wake up before sunrise. The fire is out, the floor is cold, but the world hasn't ended. Not yet.
The sky is still dark when you step out again. Mist swirling low over the fields like it's unsure if it wants to rise or settle in for the day. There's frost on the window ledges, and the chickens have refused to leave their roosts. You pull your coat tighter and make your way toward the shoreline. You've heard whispers about Noddle's Island, a strange little spit of land that sits just off the coast of Boston. And that's where you're going. No one offers to come with you. That's fine. Most locals would rather walk straight into a wolf den than step foot on Noddle's Island uninvited. A small skiff takes you across gray water, the oars creaking with each stroke like the boat is sighing. The mist thickens as you drift away from the main shoreline. The mainland fades behind you. The wind picks up, cutting through your clothes with the precision of a Puritan elder sniffing out sin. The island appears through the fog, rising slowly like a memory no one wants to claim. This is where Samuel Maverick built his fortress. Long before the Puritan fathers tightened their collars and their laws, Maverick was already here, planting orchards and mounting cannons. The house still stands, or what's left of it. The structure is wide and low, stone at the base with weathered wood rising from the top like a ship's stern buried in the earth. One of the old flankers still leans outward, blackened by time and weather. You walk the perimeter. Grass crunches under your boots. It feels like you're being watched. You are. There's a reason this place gives people chills. Maverick wasn't just some wealthy settler. He had connections to the royalists, those loyal to King Charles. He brought over the first enslaved Africans to Massachusetts. That part, most folks prefer to forget. Historians still argue whether Maverick was a pragmatist, a villain, or simply ahead of his time in all the worst ways. The island isn't big, but it holds ghosts. You pass a half-collapsed shed where someone once stored powder kegs, a patch of garden where roots still fight to push through sandy soil. The air is heavy with sea brine and something sharper, gun oil maybe, our memory. A raven caws overhead, so loudly it feels like a warning. Inside the house, the air is still and stale. Dust hangs like fog. There's an old desk near the window and a cracked musket above the hearth. A rusted chain lies coiled on the floor. No one's been here in years, but the space feels unsettled. You sit, just for a moment. The chair creaks under your weight, and the entire room seems to inhale with you. Somewhere behind the walls, something scurries. You tell yourself it's just a mouse. Probably. Back in 1660, this place stood at the intersection of fear and power. The English crown had just been restored after a turbulent decade of civil war. Maverick, ever the opportunist, wrote glowing letters to the king about how unruly the Massachusetts colonists were, how they'd flouted royal authority, how they'd built a godless commonwealth wrapped in pious clothing. And Maverick, watching from his island, thought maybe he'd be the one to bring it all back under the king's thumb. Spoiler alert, he wasn't. Still, for a time, this island was a symbol of resistance, not against the natives or the elements, but against the very Puritan order that ruled so much of New England. Maverick welcomed the Book of Common Prayer. He defended the Church of England. He argued for tolerance while clutching a sword. He was everything the Puritan elite feared: rich, connected, and utterly unpredictable. You step outside and blink against the watery light. The fog is lifting slightly, revealing more of the rocky shoreline. There's a small burial plot near the edge of the cliff. The stones are so weathered you can barely read them. One bears the faint outline of a cross, not the more austere markings favored by the Puritan dead. A quiet rebellion carved in granite. Down by the shore, the tide has gone out, revealing slick seaweed and broken crates. You find a rusted nail, long and twisted, maybe from one of Maverick's supply boats. You pocket it. Souvenirs help you remember, even if they're not entirely welcome. As you return to the boat, the island seems to recede without moving. The mist hasn't returned, but something in the air still presses against your skin like a warning. Maybe it's the damp, or maybe it's the history. You row back slowly, the oars stirring black water that smells like iron and old rope. Each stroke feels like a sentence, like you're writing your own chapter in a forgotten book. Back on the mainland, a group of children watches you return. One girl points and asks if you saw the ghost. You shake your head. She nods like she doesn't believe you. You don't blame her. You're not sure you believe you either. You spend the afternoon walking the edge of the settlement, passing cabins where candles glow faintly behind oiled parchment windows. The sky begins to dim, and the air takes on that peculiar chill that comes not just from temperature, but from the knowledge that winter is coming and wood piles are never quite high enough. A man passes you with a hunting rifle over one shoulder and a skinned hare in his free hand. He nods once, then disappears down a side path. That night, as you lie once again by the fire, the image of Noddle's Island returns. You see the crumbling walls, the silent cannons, the grave with its fading cross. You wonder what kind of man builds a fort before the world knows what it's fighting against. You wonder what kind of legacy gets left behind when you try to please a king from across the sea, in a land that barely knows your name. Sleep takes longer this time. The fire pops and sputters. The stars outside are blotted by low clouds. And just as your thoughts begin to soften, you hear it. The slow toll of a bell from across the bay. Once, twice, then silence. You're not sure if it's real. You're not sure if you want it to be.
Morning again. This time the light arrives sharp and yellow, slanting in through a cracked shutter like it's got somewhere to be. The cold has pulled back a little, replaced by a wet heat that seeps into your collar and settles under your arms. It's going to be one of those humid New England summer days when the air hangs like an overcooked pudding and every insect in the world seems personally invested in biting you. You make your way into Boston proper, or what passes for proper in 1660. The town is loud already. Hooves clatter on cobblestone. A cooper hammers a barrel rim with slow, wet thuds. Children run barefoot through puddles, shouting about sea monsters. A butcher yells at his dog, who barks at the same goose every morning. You sidestep a donkey cart and nearly trip over a broken wheel. Boston isn't a city yet. It's a nervous cluster of ambition, wood smoke and mud. But it has power. You can feel it in the people's eyes, suspicious, sharp, always calculating. They've built more than homes here. They've built a machine. It creaks and coughs, but it runs. This is where the rules get made, and sometimes bent, especially if you're wearing the right boots and know which minister to flatter. You follow the sound of voices toward the town square. There's a gathering today, and not the kind that ends with cider and awkward hymns. A preacher from Salem is visiting. He's tall, sunburned, and has the permanent squint of someone who's been reading by candlelight too long. His voice rises like a distant horn as he launches into a sermon on pride, vanity, and the dangers of long hair. A man with flowing curls pointedly turns away. The children giggle. You find a spot near the shade of the meeting house and listen.
not just to the preacher, but to the people around you. They're whispering about a merchant caught trading with Dutchmen, about a woman who spoke too freely at the last town meeting, about another who insists she saw a blue light moving through the cemetery. You're starting to realize sermons here are more like smoke designed to fill the room while someone slips out the back with the truth. This place may be founded on piety, but it runs on politics. In the crowd, you spot a figure who doesn't belong. His coat is too neat, his boots too new. He's not watching the preacher, he's watching the watchers. You wonder if he's from England, or worse, New Amsterdam. He catches your gaze for a second, then slips into the alley behind the blacksmith. You don't follow. You've read enough pamphlets to know that following mysterious men in Boston alleys never ends with pie. Later, you take a slow walk through the narrow streets. The buildings lean inward like gossiping neighbors. A tavern advertises fresh eels. A small boy offers to shine your boots using only ash and spit. You politely decline. You stop at a baker's stand where the bread is tough enough to serve as armor, and the woman selling it is missing 2 fingers and 1 eye. She gives you a smile warmer than the loaf. Down by the wharf, the harbor swells with activity. A sloop from Barbados is docked, its crew loud and sunburned. Barrels are rolled down gangplanks and crates are pried open by men with knives in their boots. You see sugar, salt, and something that might be dried pineapple or might be salted boot leather. No one here asks too many questions. A man in clerical robes approaches the dockmaster. You can't hear their words, but their body language is pure thunderstorm. The dockmaster jags a thumb at a crate marked with the Dutch symbol. The minister stiffens. The dockmaster shrugs. Trade is trade, and even God needs rope, tar, and soap. Historians still argue whether Boston in the 1660s was ruled more by the pulpit or the pocketbook. From where you're standing, the answer seems to be both. Church attendance is required by law, but everyone seems to know who snores the loudest during service. You see a merchant sneak a flask from inside his vest, then bow politely as a deacon walks past. You find yourself wandering back toward the State House. It's not grand, not yet. Just a sturdy wooden building with a wide porch and a bell that rings more often than it should. But inside, decisions are made that ripple all the way to the tip of Long Island and up to the snowy ridges of Maine. The sign outside says, General Court. It should say, Polite Argument Disguised as Law. Inside, men in woolen cloaks argue about fencing regulations, stray pigs, and the price of grain. Then the mood changes. A letter has arrived from England. The restoration is real. Charles II is on the throne, and suddenly, everyone's nervous. Boston has never liked being told what to do, and now, with a king back in power, there's a chance someone might come knocking, someone with a royal seal and a very long memory. You step outside as the debate intensifies. A breeze lifts your collar and carries the scent of bay water, sweat, and summer urgency. A bell rings again. No one reacts. Maybe it's always ringing. You pass a group of children playing near a water pump. One is pretending to be a minister. Another pretends to hang him. Everyone laughs. Then they notice you watching and scatter like startled deer. By late afternoon, the humidity breaks with a brief shower. Rain falls in hot, fat drops that sizzle when they hit the iron kettles left outside. You find shelter under an overhang and share space with a cat who refuses to acknowledge your existence. That evening, the preacher from Salem gives a second sermon. This one is quieter, more intimate. He talks about forgiveness, about how no one in New England is truly innocent, that perhaps judgment should wait. The crowd shifts uneasily. No one here likes uncertainty. They came to the New World for answers, not questions. You walk back to your sleeping place with thoughts tangled like fishing nets. Boston is a city of masks, wooden ones, woolen ones, spiritual ones. Everyone's pretending to be holier, richer, or braver than they are. And beneath it all, the harbor breathes slowly, like it's watching, waiting for someone to blink first. Sleep comes slower tonight. Your dreams are filled with sermons that echo into caves and markets that trade in secrets instead of salt. Somewhere in the haze, A man in fine boots waits in the alley, still not moving, still watching. You don't remember falling asleep, but when you wake, the bell is ringing again.
You wake to a sky the color of wet ash, and the bell is still ringing. Or maybe it started again. At this point, you stopped trying to tell the difference. You rub your face with hands that feel older than they should be and swing your legs off the pallet. The ground beneath your feet is colder today, even though the sun hasn't yet decided if it wants to rise or sulk. Someone hands you a piece of dried apple as you step into the street. No words, just a nod and a gesture. This is how people here say good morning. The apple is leathery, sour, and oddly comforting. You chew as you walk toward the Mystic River. Your destination today is Winnisimet, the old name for the area just across the river from Boston, where something half forgotten still stands, one of the earliest English fortifications in the region and one of the eeriest. You don't need a map. The path to Winnisimet is instinctive, like the route your body takes when it knows danger is nearby, but can't help approaching anyway. You take a ferry skiff across the narrow mouth of the river. The man rowing says nothing until you're halfway across. Then, without looking at you, he mutters, "Don't touch the palisade. She doesn't like it." You open your mouth to ask who she is, but the man is already focusing on the shore. Winnisimet is quiet, too quiet. Even the birds seem to avoid it. You step onto land that squishes beneath your boots, the mud thick with salt and memory. The homes here are scattered, fewer than you expected. Most are abandoned. The ones that remain seem to huddle like sheep avoiding wolves. And then you see it, the structure that started it all. Samuel Maverick's old fortified house. The one he built in 1625, long before Massachusetts Bay had its grand meetings or Dorchester had its butter churns. It's older than any other English dwelling still standing in the colony, older than most laws here, and it looks it. The palisade is gray with lichen, leaning in odd angles like teeth knocked loose by time. You count the gun holes, some still ringed with black powder scars. There's a flank tower, too, low and round, its roof collapsed. A wooden carving of a lion, now headless, guards the empty gate. Inside the enclosure, weeds grow shoulder high. You push through thistles and step into the shell of the main house. The floor groans underfoot. The hearth is massive, clearly built for more than cooking. Fire here was a weapon as much as a comfort. The beams above your head are charred in places, suggesting a fire that was either poorly managed or intentionally set, or both. The stories say Maverick built this place after hearing rumors of a native uprising. Others say he built it because he didn't trust anyone, not the natives, not the settlers, and definitely not the preachers. He was a man out of step with everyone, yet half a step ahead. Historians still argue whether his fort was defensive genius or a paranoid monument to self-importance. You sit on a stone ledge and breathe. The air smells like wet wood and rusted iron and secrets that were buried too shallow. Somewhere in the trees, a fox barks. You jump, just a little. The wind rises and rattles the palisade. She doesn't like it. The ferryman said, "You touch the wood anyway." It's cold, not just from the weather. Cold like something that remembers being burned and isn't sure it forgives you. The locals don't talk about Winnisimet much. Boston absorbed it long ago, in territory if not in spirit. But back in the day, this place mattered. When Governor Winthrop came with his shining vision of a city upon a hill, Maverick was already here, stubborn, well-armed, and unimpressed. They didn't get along. In fact, he made himself a thorn in every holy side. He opposed the theocracy of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. He called out their harsh punishments, their refusal to let non-church members vote. He argued that the king's subjects should be treated equally regardless of how many psalms they could recite. For that, he was branded troublesome, dangerous, possibly even unchristian. Later, he wrote to Charles II, complaining about the colony's independence and the hypocrisy of these Boston saints. The man had guts, or possibly no sense of self-preservation. You admire both. There's a strange moment just before you leave, when the wind stops and the birds return. A single blackbird lands on the fallen lion statue and stares at you with a too intelligent look.
Then it flies away and everything feels normal again. Almost. On the walk back toward the ferry point, you notice signs of life you missed earlier. A goat tied to a post and chewing on someone's shirt. A garden plot, awkwardly fenced with driftwood and lined with struggling beans. Someone still lives here, maybe several someones, but you didn't see them before, and you're not sure they want to be seen now. The boatman rows you back in silence. You don't ask him anything. He doesn't ask where you went. Back in Boston, the streets are busier. Trade is moving again. You pass a cart full of soap and another full of salted fish that you deeply regret smelling. Someone is shouting about the price of tar. Someone else is handing out small tracts with handwritten verses warning of the end times. You take one. The ink is smudged, the message unclear, but the signature at the bottom is unmistakable. S. Maverick. No one else seems to notice. That night, as you lay your head near the fire, your dreams take you back to Winnisumet. But this time, the palisade isn't ruined. It's tall and whole, the wood freshly cut. The guns are loaded, and someone inside is watching the sea, waiting for a ship that never comes. You wake with your heart beating too loud. The fire has burned down to glowing embers, and outside, the wind is picking up again.
The next morning greets you with a sticky breeze and the distant bleating of sheep. Not exactly a trumpet blast from heaven, but you'll take it. After the tension of Winnisumet and the eerie quiet that followed you back to Boston, today's destination feels downright pastoral. You're heading north along the coast toward the humble town of Rowley, where the clack of looms is said to hum louder than the sermons, and the sheep practically outnumber the people. You travel on foot, boots squelching in the dewy grass, along a dirt road lined with dry stone walls and the occasional abandoned cart. Someone must have planned to fix that wheel, maybe 2 years ago. A group of children pass by carrying baskets of wool. One drops a bundle and keeps walking. A dog runs after it. No one bothers to chase the dog. In Rowley, even the children seem to understand the principle of let the sheep come back if it wants to. Rowley isn't fancy. It doesn't need to be. Founded mostly by Yorkshiremen in the 1630s, it grew slowly and stubbornly, just like the people who built it. The homes are simple, the fences are hand-mended, and the smell of lanolin and hearth smoke floats like perfume through the town. You hear the looms before you see them. A rhythmic wooden chatter like 2 large skeletons clapping politely behind closed doors. Inside one cottage, you duck to avoid a low beam and see the operation up close. A woman and her 2 daughters are weaving thick rugs, their fingers flying between cotton and sheepwool, occasionally pausing to shoo away a curious cat. The rugs are rough but warm, each one a story told in dyed thread and patched mistakes. The woman doesn't look up as she speaks. She's too busy counting threads. We make what we need. Then we make what Boston needs. Then she adds, then we pray they pay us in coin and not fish this time. You step back outside and find yourself smiling. There's something honest here. Simple, but not small. The people of Rowley don't just survive. They manufacture comfort blankets, tunics, and winter coats for a world that's always colder than it should be. And yet, not all is peace. Over by the meeting house, 2 men argue over land boundaries, gesturing angrily toward a row of rocks that looks exactly like every other row of rocks. You pause long enough to hear one accuse the other of moving the stones during a thunderstorm. The accused doesn't deny it, but insists God gave him the idea. Historians still argue whether disputes like this were real territorial crises or just creative ways to avoid chores. You wander toward the fields. Fences stretch wide between homes with ample space for flocks to graze. The sheep regard you with blank indifference. One sneezes, then returns to chewing something you sincerely hope isn't your bootlace. You pass a man shearing a particularly moody-looking ram. He nods as you pass, then shouts, "Careful of that one. He's got the devil in him." You're not sure if he means the ram or the next town over. At midday, you sit near the common well and listen to the gossip, which pours out more freely than the water. One woman complains about a weaver who keeps singing psalms off-key. Another claims to have seen a suspiciously French-looking fox sneaking near her hen house. Scandalous, dangerous, possibly Dutch. Not everyone here trusts the outside world. Boston is viewed with mild suspicion, Salem with genuine concern. The Dutch colonies, not even worth the breath to curse. Raleigh minds its own business and expects the same courtesy in return. Still, the outside world leaks in. Just last week, a letter arrived warning of possible changes to trade routes if the Crown reasserts its grip on the colonies. A man named Maverick, yes, again, is apparently petitioning the king to rein in the colonies. That man's mouth runs faster than his feet, someone says. You decide not to mention your recent dreams about him. By afternoon, you're invited into a barn where wool is being carded and dyed. The smell is sharp, wet fleece, heated dye, and the faint sourness of unwashed hands. But the color is beautiful. Deep browns, warm reds, faded blues pulled from crushed berries and bark. One teenage girl is making a cloak that looks like it belongs on a bishop, not a farmer. She shrugs when you ask what it's for. Someone in Salem ordered it, said he wanted to look impressive during court. You raise an eyebrow. She nods. Which court? You blink. She returns to her stitching like it's the most natural thing in the world. The rest of the day passes quietly. You follow a small stream that meanders through the edge of town. A boy floats a bundle of wool down it, chasing it with a stick. A goose attacks him. He screams. No one intervenes. The goose wins. Later, you're treated to a supper of barley stew, hard cheese, and something someone insists is apple pie but tastes more like regret in crust form. Conversation turns to winter preparations. Everyone seems to dread it but prepares for it with military discipline. Firewood is being stacked, wool is being stored, jars are being sealed. And always there is the work of the loom. Even in the dark you can hear it. Cock, talk, talk. Like the steady beat of a world being woven back together, one thread at a time. As night falls, the town settles into silence. No bells here, just the soft lowing of sheep, the groan of old wood under wind, and the distant clack of one last stubborn waver finishing her work by candlelight. You lie beneath a thick wool blanket, dyed a pale gray. It smells like sheep and lavender. You fall asleep to the sound of threads sliding through cloth. And in your dreams, the loom keeps weaving. But this time, the fabric is not wool. It's made of mist and shadow. And something is watching from the other side.
The first thing you notice when you wake is that the window has fogged over from the inside. The wool blanket is still wrapped tightly around you, holding in the warmth like a second skin. Outside, the sun is barely rising, and a gentle drizzle paints the rooftops in silver streaks. You sit up slowly, your back a little stiff, your breath visible in the chill. It's the kind of morning that makes you question every decision involving leaving a warm bed. But today, you're heading toward Newbury. And Newbury, they say, has a particular way of making a guest feel watched. The road out of Rowley is soft with mud, the previous day's drizzle having soaked the clay path into a state best described as regretfully walkable. As you trudge along, your boots gain weight with every step. You pass wide fields where low stone walls divide one man's property from another's by a matter of inches, though each insists it's a righteous boundary ordained by God, and not just stubborn guesswork. Eventually, Newbury begins to take shape on the horizon. It's not a town, exactly, but a long and unusually spaced ribbon of homes. Each house stands with a good stretch of field and garden between it and the next, like it's pretending not to care what the neighbors are doing, but absolutely keeping tabs.
You walk through the center path, which doesn't feel much like a street, more like a polite agreement not to plant anything in the middle. The town itself is modest, but the mood, different. Not unfriendly, but careful, measured. There's an air here of cautious cooperation, like everyone is trying to keep the peace because they remember too well what happens when it breaks. You pass two men repairing a fence, their conversations so quiet you can't even catch a word. Across the way, a woman throws out wash water and eyes you like she's memorizing your face. This is Puritan country, deep Puritan. If Boston is a city pretending to be a church, then Newbury is a church pretending to be a village. The local minister is said to be a man of great discipline and very few jokes. When you ask a passing child where he lives, she says, "In the house that never laughs." You choose not to verify. A town elder eventually gives you a short walking tour. His coat is thick and moth-chewed, and he smells like cold iron and smoked trout. He tells you that Newbury is a town of order, that each house was placed with purpose, that the land was granted with thought, that the fences are not only to keep in cattle, but to keep out chaos. You ask him about local disputes. He chuckles without smiling. There are none, he says. We settle things with prayer and precision. Then he adds, as if you needed clarification, the kind of precision that includes musket range. You pass the edge of the fields and make your way toward the marshes. The Merrimack River bends wide and lazy here, and the wetlands stretch far into the distance. In the summer, the marsh buzzes with mosquitoes, frogs, and the occasional unseen thing that makes just enough noise to keep people out. Right now it's quiet. The fog hangs low. Reeds sway like whispers. A wooden footbridge crosses the narrowest part of the river. You step onto it and pause halfway across. The planks creak. The wind presses cold against your cheek. And then you see it. A figure standing in the shallows below. Not moving, not fishing, just there. Watching the river flow backward or forward, you're not sure. You blink. Gone. You keep walking. Back in town, a small gathering forms near one of the meeting houses. Two, in fact, exist in Newbury and Old Newbury combined. You're told that sermons alternate depending on the weather, the preacher's horse, and whether the roof is leaking again. Today's sermon will be about obedience. You smile politely and say you've heard enough sermons for the week. The woman nods. She understands. You take a rest near a stand of tall trees where some of the town's sheep have wandered for shade. One lies on its side, chewing something slowly. You swear it's staring at you, judging you. Newbury's livestock, it seems, have inherited the same moral clarity as their owners. While eating your midday ration of bread and salted pear, you're approached by a man with an old musket and the world's most tired eyes. He tells you that the town is expecting more settlers, that expansion is inevitable. But with expansion comes disorder. He doesn't say this like a complaint. He says it like a warning. More land means more fences. More fences means more arguments. And arguments, he says, mean courts. And courts, they bring out the devils in us. Historians still argue whether the courts of early Newbury were truly judicial or just rituals of collective suspicion. Some say the town ran on rules and repentance. Others say it ran on gossip and grudges. In the evening, as the sky shifts from gray to a muddled gold, you find yourself seated near a candlelit table in a home built with tight beams and a tighter sense of propriety. Your host reads from the Bible before dinner, his voice flat, unwavering, and absolutely without punctuation. The meal is simple: turnips, salt herring, and a mystery pudding that may or may not be made from boiled books. The conversation is light, meaning no one brings up Satan or politics. The children listen silently, their posture perfect. You wonder if they're actually children or just well-trained miniature judges. That night you sleep in a loft above the kitchen. The heat from the hearth rises gently, warming your feet. Below, You hear the clink of metal as someone locks the front door. Twice. You dream of fences that stretch on forever, of houses placed too far apart to ever call for help, of voices arguing over invisible lines drawn through the fog, and of something waiting in the marsh, holding still until the boundary shifts just enough to let it in. You wake to find your boots neatly cleaned and placed by the bed. No one mentions it. Not even the sheep.
The sky is pale and bruised when you set off, with low clouds rolling in like someone dragged a damp wool blanket over the heavens. You've left Newbury behind, and your boots crunch on gravel as you head southwest toward Ipswich. The air is heavy with moisture and the promise of something colder behind it. You pass through fields where fences look freshly mended, as if someone stayed up all night arguing with the wind and lost. Ipswich sits near the head of a river with the same name, winding slow and wide through salt marshes and thin forest. The town itself is larger than Rowley or Newbury, but not exactly loud. It carries itself with the confidence of an old soul. Settled early in 1633 by Puritans, Ipswich quickly became a hub of trade, law, and religious ironcladness. There's a reason locals call it the Watchtower of the North. It doesn't relax. It observes. The moment your boots hit the edge of town, you can feel it. It's not the kind of place where people wave from porches or shout cheerful greetings across fields. No, Ipswich stares through you. It expects order. It rewards diligence. It distrusts everything else, including people who walk too slow, smile too wide, or carry too many books. As you walk the main road, you catch sight of the meeting house, a boxy wooden structure with a roof line like a furrowed brow. Outside, 3 men are arguing over a boundary marker that seems to have migrated during the night. One insists the stone was always 3 feet from the elm. The other swears it was only 2. The third stands with arms folded, claiming he saw the devil himself roll it uphill with a grin. You think he's joking. You hope he's joking. The timber industry rules here. Ipswich is surrounded by thick pine forests that feed its sawmills, and those sawmills feed the shipbuilders, house framers, and desperate fence fixers of half the coast. Boards, beams, barrel staves, they all start in Ipswich, and that makes trees valuable, possibly even sacred, which is why everyone's tense. Lately, more trees are being claimed than can be legally managed. The woods, once open, are now carved into plots with hand-drawn maps and questionable accuracy. You learn that 2 families once nearly came to blows over a single massive pine, not because they wanted it, but because neither could stand the idea of the other one having it. You're invited to walk the woods with a sawyer named Caleb. He's a lanky man with long arms and a face like carved bark. His axe looks heavier than your leg, but he swings it like a feather. As you follow him through the underbrush, he explains the markings cut into the trunks: slashes to claim ownership, circles to mark felling targets, X's to warn others away. Then he stops beside a stump, freshly cut, sap still dripping. He leans close and frowns. This one wasn't marked. You ask what that means. It means someone stealing trees. He spits once, then adds, or something else is. He laughs, but his eyes don't. Back in town, stories circulate about sawmill accidents, blades flying loose, logs splitting the wrong way. One man supposedly saw a tree fall upward. Another claims a deer walked into his workshop and just stared at him until the fire went out. Everyone's got a story. Most start with, now, don't repeat this, but... You stop by the home of an old woman named Deliverance Hart. She lives near the marsh in a slanted cottage with too many windows and not enough explanations. She offers you tea made from bark and something she calls
field nettle calm. Her goat, Mercy, chews on your sleeve while you sit. Deliverance talks about dreams. Hers, yours, the ones that hang in trees like forgotten coats. She says the land is growing restless. You nod, like you understand. You don't. Later, you're told Deliverance has been questioned before, not quite accused, but definitely examined. People whisper, say she speaks to owls and cures fevers with salt drawn in circles, say that her herbs work too well, or not at all. Historians still argue whether Ipswich truly fostered more suspicion than its neighbors, or whether we just have more records of its paranoia. You pass the tavern and overhear men discussing politics. A man named Maverick has sent another letter to England. He wants more order, or less freedom, or more of both, depending who you ask. Someone calls him a snake with a pin. Another shrugs and says he'll be governor or ghost by winter. At sunset, the woods behind town seem to glow with a strange green-gold shimmer. Fog creeps low to the ground. You hear chopping far off, then silence, then a scream, then laughter. You're not sure if it's one man or four. For supper, you eat in a family home where everyone chews slowly and no one speaks until after the prayer, which lasts long enough for your stew to cool twice. The children watch you with wide eyes, like they're waiting for you to say something inappropriate. You do not. As you lie down in the loft above the root cellar, the wind howls through the chinks in the wall. The boards creak like old men telling lies. You can smell pine sap and something older, wet bark, maybe smoke. You dream of trees that walk, of axes that swing themselves, of a courtroom held in a forest where the witnesses are owls and the judge is made of bark. When you wake, there's a pine cone by your pillow. You didn't leave the window open.
The road south bends towards salt and wind. You leave Ipswich before the sun finishes yawning into the sky, your breath puffing out in little ghost clouds as you move. Today, you're headed toward the rocky claws of Cape Ann and the town they now call Gloucester, though many still pronounce it Gloucester, as if swallowing half the name will help it go down easier. You follow the edge of the marshes, then dip into dark woods where the air smells of wet pine needles and the occasional whiff of fish. At times the trees thin and you see the glimmer of the Atlantic ahead, vast, iron gray, and restless. The land here feels carved rather than built. Nothing is gentle about it. The coastline juts and twists like something broken and badly healed. Gloucester is a fishing village. Always has been, probably always will be, unless someone invents a better use for freezing water, rotting rope, and the world's most miserable profession. But to the Puritans of the 1660s, it was vital. Codfish meant food, trade, and leverage. Those fish, pale, bland, and bafflingly ugly, were the silver of the sea, and the people of Cape Ann caught them like their lives depended on it, which they did. You arrive as a cold wind barrels off the water, slapping your face like a wet glove. The harbor is a crescent of misery. Boats bob awkwardly, tethered to half-rotted posts. The smell of fish is overwhelming, mixing with brine and old smoke. A boy passes you dragging a sack that leaks fish guts onto the road like some awful breadcrumb trail. At the wharf, men in thick wool stand knee-deep in barrels, salting cod with an urgency that borders on religious. One of them, a red-faced man with no teeth and too many opinions, tells you that fishing is better when the water sings. You ask what that means. He grins and points to the sea. When the wind whistles just so, you hear it. That means the cod are ready to come home. If it screams, though, best to stay inland. It's the kind of thing that makes you pause, just long enough to wonder if it's nonsense or prophecy. You spend time with a family that hosts you out of a sense of tradition or guilt. It's hard to tell. Their cottage sits high above the coast, where the wind slams into the walls like it's trying to break in and lecture everyone. Inside, it's warm enough. There's stew made from fish, potatoes, and something vaguely green. You ask if it's herbs. They shrug. Might be moss. The father tells you the story of the curse. Not the usual New England fire and brimstone, but something older. They say when the settlers first came to Cape Ann, the local tribes warned them. Something sacred lived in the black water past the reefs. A spirit or a beast, or maybe both, that did not take kindly to harpoons or salt theft. But the settlers fished anyway. And when one particularly arrogant man gutted a cod on the Sabbath, they say the waves rose up and dragged his house into the sea. You ask if it's just a story. The man doesn't answer, just chews his bread and looks out the window. Historians still argue whether this tale was born of indigenous warning, Protestant guilt, or just a bad winter storm. But the sea here does seem personal. The fishing practices are brutal. Men rise before dawn, row for miles, cast heavy nets, and hope to fill them before frostbite or drowning. You watch a boat return after 3 days, the crew half-starved and shaking. They caught 5 fish. 5. The boat's name is Hope. You try not to laugh. A boy offers to take you along the coast in a skiff. He can't be older than 15, but he rows with the strength of a man twice his size. You sit in silence as the water slaps against the hull. The fog rolls in like spilled milk. Out here, the shore disappears. You lose track of where land ends and myth begins. Then you see it. A black shape, motionless just beneath the surface. Not a rock, not a fish, something larger. You lean forward. Don't look too long, the boy says. Why? Because it might look back. You glance at him. His face is blank. His eyes say he's seen something he doesn't want to explain. Later, when you're back on shore, you ask others about it. Most wave you off, but one old woman spits into the dirt and says, "The water remembers." That's all. That's enough. You attend a community meeting in the evening. It's held in a barn by lantern light. The topic is fish preservation and dock repairs, but it quickly devolves into complaints about Boston taxes, winter grain rot, and a man named Elias who apparently sings too loudly when he drinks. Still, the mood is strangely calm. These are people who fight with rope-burned hands and frostbitten feet. Their anger doesn't flash, it simmers. One man suggests erecting a new watchtower on the ridge. Another wants to petition Boston for more salt. Someone else mutters that the sea should be left alone. Everyone hears him. No one responds. You sleep in a loft above a shed filled with nets. The smell of seawater and dried fish clings to your clothes, your hair, your dreams. You dream of being pulled out to sea by something you can't see but somehow trust. You dream of codfish with eyes like mirrors, of a woman singing in a language made entirely of tides. You wake before dawn to the sound of the sea breathing deep, slow and patient, like it's waiting. You wake to gulls screaming above a shore that smells of wet wood, old salt, and something sourer, something human. Today you follow the coast even farther north, past the edge of Massachusetts, into the lands claimed and disputed by multiple crowns and companies. Your destination is Pemmican, a once bustling outpost and now a strange dream of empire, swallowed and spat out by tide and politics. The trail north becomes narrow and poorly kept, winding between forests that feel older, colder, and less impressed by your footsteps. A few scattered farms crouch in the trees like survivors too exhausted to build fences. When you ask how far to Pemmican, one man shrugs and says, "Far enough to regret." You thank him and keep walking. Eventually, the trees thin and you catch sight of a cove, a rocky crescent nestled beside battered wharves and leaning chimneys. Pemmican, or what's left of it. Once it was a thriving English fishing settlement and trading post. Now it's somewhere between a village and a whisper. There's a palisade, barely standing. A fort, or the memory of one, clings to a rise overlooking the bay. The flag is tattered. No one salutes it. You're greeted by a man named Josiah, who runs the only inn still taking travelers, if you can call salted pork lumpy straw beds, and rainwater stew, hospitality. He shows you a room above the common hall, points to a bucket, then leaves. Welcome to frontier luxury. Over dinner, you learn Pemaquid is still caught in the coils of empires. The English say it's theirs. The French say it's not. Native tribes trade here, sometimes. Sometimes they don't. Every few years, someone arrives with papers and declarations demanding taxes or loyalty. The settlers nod politely and ignore them, or they disappear into the woods until the trouble passes. Historians still debate whether Pemaquid was ever truly English, or whether it simply existed in the gaps between European plans, useful only until the next war, next treaty, or next raid. The old fort was built by the English years ago, then burned by the French, then rebuilt by people who weren't paid for the work. Now it's mostly moss-covered stones, 2 cannons, and a cellar where children dare each other to sleep. You visit it in the early morning. Fog clings to the ground like cold breath. As you step through the broken gate, you hear voices, faint, rhythmic, speaking in no language you recognize. You turn. No one is there. You decide not to go into the cellar. Trade is the bloodline here. Not gold, not silver, but beaver pelts, smoked fish, corn, tobacco, and iron nails. Every item feels borrowed, temporary, on the verge of mold. You watch a man swap a barrel of eels for a worn musket. Another offers salted cod in exchange for a dog. The dog refuses. That night, you sit by the fire as an old trapper tells stories. He says there's a ghost ship that sails just beyond the horizon, seen only at dusk. Its sails made of stitched skin, its crew headless. You smile nervously. He doesn't. You hear about silver buried by French pirates, about Jesuit spies disguised as fur traders, about a man who vanished after claiming he found a coin marked with the devil's name. These aren't bedtime stories. They're the kind people whisper when the fire's too low and the night's too quiet. At dawn, the mist is so thick you can't see your own hands. You hear bells. Not church bells. There's no church here, but small, sharp ones, like those on a trader's mule. When you step outside, the town seems hollow. The buildings are there, but the people aren't. For a brief moment, you wonder if you imagined all of it. Then a child runs past, laughing, and the spell breaks. You wander the market stalls. Few are open. One woman sells jars of pickled roots and dried herbs. She warns you not to take the green powder unless you're desperate. You ask what it does. She says it shows the truth, but only once. You buy a spoonful just in case. At the edge of town, you find a tiny chapel made of driftwood and iron nails. No minister serves it now. Instead, a ledger rests on a podium. People write prayers, trades, and sometimes curses in it. You flip through pages that alternate between heartfelt cries for deliverance and angry notes about stolen sheep. One entry reads, "The sea took my brother. I take his net." You leave a line of your own. Still walking, still listening. In the evening, there's a celebration, or something like one. The townsfolk gather by the fire pit. There's dried fish, weak ale, and music played on a flute made from bone. Children dance. Adults try not to. An old man sings a song about a shipwreck in a key only ravens understand. A woman named Martha leans close and tells you Pemaquid will be gone soon. Not burned or abandoned, just forgotten. Like a dream you had once and couldn't recall in the morning. She says, this place was never meant to last. It only exists when someone's looking at it. You don't know whether to laugh or nod, so you do both. That night, your dreams are jumbled. You walk the shore and find silver coins with holes in the center. You open the fort's cellar and it's filled with water. You trade your voice for a bag of salt, then forget how to speak. You wake before sunrise to a silence so complete it hums in your bones. Pemaquid is still there, but you're not sure it will be tomorrow. You head inland now, your feet crunching over brittle leaves and moss-licked roots as you follow a half-forgotten trail west toward Casco Bay. The coastline fades behind you, replaced by thick woods and narrow rivers that thread like silver veins through the pine. The land here feels heavier, like it remembers everything that has ever happened upon it and isn't quite ready to forgive. Casco is not a town so much as a scattered cluster of fortified homes and ambitions, stitched together by muddy roads, weary glances, and the stubbornness of settlers who refuse to die or leave. You arrive just as the clouds open up, turning the path into brown porridge and your boots into regret. A boy with a bow slung over one shoulder points you toward the central homestead, a longhouse with a high roof and timber beams blackened by both fire and smoke. The people of Casco don't talk much. They nod, gesture, mutter. Their words feel like borrowed goods, exchanged only when necessary. You ask one man what year it is. He thinks for a moment and then shrugs. After the last raid, he says, before the next. This is Wabanaki land, or at least it was, and still is, depending on who you ask and how loud you're willing to shout. The English have claimed it, built a handful of post and trading stations, and promised peace in letters sealed with wax and hope. But those promises are fragile as frost. One insult, one theft, one drunk settler with a musket and a short temper. That's all it takes. The scars are everywhere. Burned stables, shattered fences, trees hacked down not for timber but for spite. The settlers call them frontier warnings. You pass a stump with an iron nail driven through the center and a red feather tied to the top. You ask what it means, no one answers. Historians still argue whether Casco was an outpost of diplomacy or a flashpoint of colonial arrogance. The truth, like everything in this place, is likely tangled in both. You're invited to a meeting at the main house. The walls are thick, the shutters bolted, and a musket leans against every window. The topic? Who saw what and where? Someone claims they saw smoke across the bay. Another reports footprints in the ash fields, bare feet, not English. A third mutters about a missing cow and how its blood led into the forest and then simply stopped. You're not sure whether to be more disturbed by the cow or the silence that follows. Still, life continues. Children chase each other through muddy lanes, dodging chickens and stacked firewood. A woman teaches her daughter to weave cloth from nettle fiber, her fingers quick and practiced. You help chop wood with a man named Eli, whose beard has frost in it even at noon. He tells you the only thing sharper than his axe is his wife's tongue, then he invites you for soup. You learn that the people here have built their homes with escape tunnels, narrow shafts that lead from cellar to stream bed or into the woods. One family shows you theirs. You crawl inside and feel the dirt pressing in like an accusation. It's barely wide enough to wriggle through. But when your head pops out behind a boulder 40 yards from the house, you understand. Here, survival isn't a philosophy, it's architecture. You visit the local trading post, a cabin reinforced with stone and guarded by a boy no older than 13 who holds a flintlock longer than his arm. Inside, the trader is a Frenchman named Baptiste who sells iron kettles, mirrors, powder, beads, and rumors. Lots of rumors. He tells you that a Jesuit priest passed through weeks ago, offering medicine and salvation. Some say he healed a dying child. Others claim he poisoned a well. No one knows where he went, but a black dog was seen following him. Some say the dog had no eyes. You buy a pair of mittens and a pouch of dried cranberries, which he assures you are not cursed. That night, as the wind rises and the trees crackle like whispering paper, the people gather in the longhouse. There's no music, but someone begins reciting scripture by firelight. The familiar words feel stretched thin here, like a thread pulled too far. You hear one verse repeated again and again, "Be sober, be vigilant." The fire flares unexpectedly. Everyone goes quiet. Later, in the shadows of the sleeping loft, an elder named Ruth tells you about the stone circle deep in the woods. She says it predates the English, the French, even the tribes. She says when the moon is high and the owls stop calling, you can hear it hum. You ask why no one tears it down. She just laughs and says, "We're not stupid." In the morning, the trail west is blocked by a fallen pine, massive and still oozing sap. No storm brought it down, it's simply cracked in half. You and Eli chop it into pieces for hours. Inside the trunk, a nest of ants scatters, furious. One of them bites your wrist. It swells instantly. It means the land's watching you, Eli says.
You ask if that's good or bad. Depends what it sees, he replies. You leave Casco with a bag of salted venison, a fresh blister, and the distinct feeling that you were never quite welcome, but never truly in danger either. Just noticed. As the trees close behind you and the last chimney smoke disappears over the ridge, you wonder what's left in that place when no one's watching. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything.
The trail dips low again, winding through brush and shadow as you press farther down the coast toward the half-remembered edges of York. The sun cuts through pine boughs in slim golden lines, and the air grows thick with salt and loam. You're not quite sure where the border is between one settlement and the next. The truth is, no one really knows. These places blur into each other, like ink spilled on old paper. But you'll know York when you feel it, or when it feels you. York, once called Agamenticus, is a place with too many names and too few people to use them. The town has shifted over time, not just in location, but in allegiance, memory, and weight. Founded, forgotten, renamed, reclaimed, this is the wandering town, the one that doesn't quite stay where it's put. You cross a shallow stream by walking over a half-buried plank and think maybe this is it. Or maybe not. The road bends and splits. You choose left, mostly out of instinct, and stumble upon a crumbling stone marker etched with a name you don't recognize. Moss covers the date. You pause and brush it away. The year reads 1631. Older than most gravestones. Newer than the forest it sleeps in. When you finally arrive and what passes for the town center is almost silent. A few timber houses gather on a slope like gossiping hens, their windows shuttered against the wind. There's a chapel, squat and wooden with one side sagging inward. And beside it, and probably, a schoolhouse. A boy sits on the step chewing on something green and bitter looking. He doesn't say anything. Just watches you with eyes too old for his face. You meet a man named Amos, one of York's few remaining elders, who offers you a seat near a smoking fire pit. He says you're lucky the river crossing didn't wash out behind you. Last week, he says, a traveler made it across in the morning, but by evening, the stream had taken back the bridge. The traveler stayed the night and was never seen again. Maybe he walked back. Maybe not. Amos tells you York has changed hands 3 times in 20 years. Once it belonged to the English crown, then to the Massachusetts Bay Colony, then to the Lords of Gorges Grant. Each time someone new shows up waving papers and orders, the people nod, keep farming, and quietly ignore them. Taxes are paid when the weather's good and crops have been kind. Otherwise, they aren't. If someone asks too many questions, well, the road back is always open. Historians still argue whether York was a loyal Puritan outpost or an independent-minded trading village with one foot always out the door. The truth, Amos suggests, is simpler. York is whatever it needs to be to survive. You walk the town's uneven paths and notice the odd spacing between homes. Too far to feel like a neighborhood, but not quite distant enough for true solitude. Some say it's to keep fire from spreading. Others say it's to keep secrets from traveling. You stop at a house that's partly collapsed and spot a sign over the doorway. It reads, "Welcome" and "Keep out" in the same hand. That afternoon, you help a family thresh grain behind their barn. The father wears a patched coat with buttons made from horn. The mother works in silence, her sleeves rolled high, her hands scarred and strong. Their daughter, maybe 10, hums an old sea shanty under her breath, something about a ship that left York and never made it back. She sings without looking up. Later, you find yourself wandering toward the old garrison house near the edge of town. It's built from squared logs, thick and weathered, with tiny murder holes in the upper walls. A ladder leads to a rooftop door. No one's up there now.
but the ashes in the corner hearth are still warm. Someone was keeping watch. Maybe they still are. You meet a woman named Mercy who runs what she calls a shop. It's really a shed with dried herbs hanging from the rafters, a few tins of powder, and 4 jars of pickled roots. She offers you a cup of something bitter that she claims clears the fog from your thoughts. You drink it. Your thoughts remain foggy. She says that means it's working. Mercy tells you about the tax collectors who came 2 winters ago. They brought ledgers, official stamps, and a young minister who looked nervous in his own skin. The townspeople fed them, sheltered them, and then pointed them back toward the bridge. The collectors never returned. She doesn't say what happened to the minister. That night, you sleep in a small loft above Amos's barn. The roof leaks slightly in one corner, dripping onto a pile of old lumber. You lie there, listening to the wind push through the eaves. Somewhere outside, an owl calls. Somewhere farther, something else answers. Your dreams are disjointed. You walk the same crooked street over and over, but each time the houses are rearranged. Doors lead to basements, windows look out on stone walls. Eventually, the sky turns red and the buildings vanish. All that's left is the stream you crossed and the boy still sitting on the step. In the morning, you wake to hooves on packed dirt. A rider has arrived in town, wrapped in a thick cloak, face hidden. They dismount, speak to no one, leave a letter nailed to the chapel door, and disappear the way they came. The letter says nothing about God or taxes. It simply reads, "Do not follow the water past the 3rd bend." Amos burns the note without reading it aloud. You don't ask questions. You've learned that people here answer only the things you shouldn't have asked. Before you leave York, you walk down to the water's edge. The harbor is narrow, shallow, and shaped like a bent finger. A single fishing boat sits at anchor, its hull patched with tar and cloth. A woman on board waves, then disappears below deck. You wonder how long she's lived there, whether she ever comes ashore, whether she even needs to. As you turn to go, a dog trots up beside you. No collar, no name. Just walks alongside for a while as if to see you off. At the edge of town, it stops, sits, and stares. You wave. It doesn't move. You don't look back again.
The wind shifts as you move farther south, and you notice it first in your teeth. It's sharper here, carrying the bite of the sea mixed with the cold whisper of something older. The path toward Kittery hugs the coast loosely, slipping between wooded bluffs and sudden drops that reveal, through the pine trunks, quick glimpses of surf crashing on jagged rocks. You walk for hours and see no one, just a broken fence, a collapsed dock, and a trail of wabbing ruts so deep they filled with brackish water. Kittery is the last outpost before New Hampshire dreams of beginning. It's not a town in the way Boston or Salem might boast, with bells and meeting houses and well-laid cobbles. No, Kittery is something else entirely, a stretched thread of wharves and fields and defensive households, huddled along the shore like teeth bracing for a blow. It's the kind of place you arrive at without meaning to, the trees thinning out and the smell of fish thickening until, quite suddenly, there it is, men mending nets, smoke from salt-boiling fires, and children shouting about a drowned goat. The people here wear 2 faces, one for work and one for war. They do not speak idly. You're welcomed, if only because no one has the time to turn you away. You meet a man named Josiah, a shipwright with more missing fingers than whole ones. He gives you a tour of his yard, a skeletal hull being built upside down, half covered in tarps, and a pile of timber so carefully arranged it might be mistaken for art. He tells you Kittery used to be part of Sir Ferdinando Gorge's grant, then swallowed into Massachusetts like a stubborn lump in the throat. Now we answer to Boston, he says, spitting on the ground.
until someone new sails in with better promises. Historians still argue whether Kittery was built as a loyalist safe haven or a merchant's loophole for tax dodging and fish smuggling. Either way, it smells like both. In the tavern that night, you hear stories of the Piscataqua River swallowing entire boats without a trace. One man insists that in a particularly cold winter, the ice once froze so fast it trapped a schooner mid-turn, splitting her open like an overripe squash. Another tells you about the eel man of Pepperell's Cove, a creature with long fingers and skin like river sludge, who climbs aboard fishing vessels to whisper secrets in the ears of sleeping sailors. They laugh, but no one makes eye contact while they do. The tavern walls are plastered with charts and old maps, most of them hand-drawn and stained with sea salt. One shows a small island labeled simply, "Not safe." You point at it. Josiah shrugs. "Wrecked too many times to be a coincidence," he mutters. Some say the rocks move. The next morning, you're up early enough to watch the sunrise burn a slow orange trail across the bay. Boats rock gently in their moorings, and gulls squabble over scraps left near the fish sheds. A young woman named Eliza hands you a tin mug of something hot and bitter that smells like burnt bark. She doesn't say what it is, only that it will keep the sea out of your bones. Eliza is one of the few people in town who still reads the old Dutch charts. Her grandfather sailed under a Dutch flag before being captured and deciding quite sensibly to stay put. She shows you a thick leather-bound book filled with symbols, tides, and observations. There's an entry for a lunar eclipse in 1655 that simply reads, "The tide reversed. 3 drowned. 1 walked home dry." She smiles when she shows you that line. You're not sure whether to laugh or shiver. You help load barrels of salt cod onto a waiting sloop. The crew thanks you with quiet nods and a slice of dried apple. Before they push off, one sailor, gray-bearded and heavy with the smell of rope, gives you a carved stone in the shape of a fish. Says it's for luck. Says to bury it near fresh water before you leave town, or you'll dream of drowning. You pocket it and try not to think about why he won't meet your eyes. You visit the local watch post next, a squat building with narrow slits for windows and a pile of rusted pikes by the entrance. The watchman is asleep, a musket propped beside his chair. You step around him and peer through the slit. Beyond, the ocean stretches into a pewter haze. A single sail flutters far out where the sea turns to mist. That night, lightning flashes across the sky with no thunder, just light and silence. The town dogs howl in unison, then stop just as abruptly. You see Josiah in the street, staring upward. You ask if storms are common. He says this isn't a storm. He doesn't explain. You lie awake in the loft of the tavern, watching the beams creak above you. Someone on the floor below is humming a lullaby in a language you don't recognize. You count the creaks. You count the waves. You count the hours until dawn. In your dreams, the eelman does not speak. He only reaches toward your face with fingers that seem to never end. Morning comes slow, the town waking in fragments. You leave before the tide rises too high to cross the bridge. Eliza hands you a small bundle wrapped in canvas. Inside is a compass, a wedge of bread, and a note that simply reads, "It points true, but not north." You ask what that means. She says you'll figure it out when it matters. And with that, you step beyond Kittery, the final thread of Maine's tapestry tugging at your coat as the trail winds inland once more.
The road turns westward now, away from the roar of the sea and into the crumpled hills and dense woodlands that spill into New Hampshire. The wind still carries salt, but faintly, as if the coast is becoming a memory. You pass a moss-covered stone wall, half collapsed, that once marked someone's land. But who it belonged to, no one knows. Trees have swallowed it whole. Roots split the stones like old bones. You're heading toward Dover, though you don't know exactly when you'll arrive. There are no signs here, just paths made by boots, hooves, and hope.
It takes most of the day to find the river again. The Cochecho cuts through the woods like a muddy vein, slow and sluggish this time of year. You follow it, trusting that it still leads to people. By dusk, you see smoke. Not the kind from a fire gone wrong, but the steady, curling kind of hearth that's been burning since morning. A thatched roof comes into view, then a second, then the rough outline of a garrison house, square and defiant. Dover has no gate, no walls, but every house looks like it's ready to become a fortress at a moment's notice, and for good reason. You're welcomed by a man named Silas, who watches you with the eyes of someone who's already survived too much to worry about one more stranger. He asks no questions, just offers you a bowl of broth and a seat by the fire. In return, you say nothing about the scars along his arms or the musket that never leaves his side. As you eat, Silas tells you the story Dover tries not to remember. In 1689, years from now, but still echoing backward, the town will suffer a brutal attack from the Abenaki people during King William's War. But even now, in 1660, the tension is already simmering. Treaties are fragile, misunderstandings common, and trust thinner than birch bark. Historians still argue whether the violence that followed was inevitable or carefully provoked by colonial greed and British mismanagement. Silas doesn't argue. He just says, "We had it coming." You sleep that night in a half-finished upper loft. There are gaps in the roof and you can see the stars. You hear dogs bark once, then go quiet. Then something else. A distant splash from the river. Maybe a beaver, maybe not. In the morning, you explore the town. Dover is a strange blend of wilderness and civilization. There's a small mill grinding corn by the river's edge, powered by a crooked wheel that groans with every turn. A group of women wash clothes nearby, their songs in harmony with the creak and splash. One of them tells you about a ghost dog that guards the mill at night. She swears it once bit a thief, but the bite mark looked like a human hand. You visit the trading post, which smells of tobacco, sweat, and salted meat. A young boy offers to sell you a blessed musket ball for a penny. When you ask what makes it blessed, he says it once killed a bear and missed a preacher in the same shot. You buy it. Farther up the hill, you find the meeting house, stark and angular, with the bell that hasn't rung in weeks. A piece of parchment tacked to the door lists public fines: 5 shillings for swearing, 10 for missing the Sabbath, 20 for public drunkenness. There's a crude sketch of a woman's face at the bottom with the word witch scrawled beneath it. The ink is fresh. You ask Silas if witch trials have come this far yet. He shakes his head. Not yet, but fear travels faster than facts. There's a tension here, stretched thin over every conversation. The people are wary, not of you exactly, but of each other. Dover is a settlement with too many buried grievances and not enough ground to hide them all. A man named John shows you the old trail that leads to the Abenaki camp. He says it's abandoned now, but leaves out whether that was voluntary. You thank him and decline the offer to follow it. That night, you attend a gathering in the common hall. Not a dance or feast, but a meeting, the kind with furrowed brows and clenched fists and low voices. They talk of wolves killing livestock, of arrows found in trees, of whispers from the woods. You sit in the back, mostly silent, until someone asks if you've seen anything strange. You say you once saw a goat climb a ladder. They laugh, tension breaking just a little. You leave the meeting with a piece of advice from an older woman named Ruth. She says in Dover, peace is what you pretend long enough to make it real. You sleep deeper that night, maybe because you're starting to understand the rules of survival. Don't speak too soon, don't walk too far, and always, always face the river. In your dreams, you see the town gurning, not in fear, but in defiance. Silhouettes move through the smoke. Some carry muskets, others carry nothing, but all of them walk upright, heads high, into whatever comes next. The morning light filters through the rafters, golden and calm. You descend the ladder from the loft, stretch, and find that Silas is already gone. A bowl of warm porridge sits on the table. Next to it, a map. A single red mark sits just outside the edge of town where the road splits again. You finish the porridge, fold the map, step out into the cool air. You don't look back.
The road into Exeter isn't really a road at all. It's more like a stitched-together sequence of hoof-beaten mud, mossy stones, and fallen trees cleared just enough to allow passage. Your boots sink deeper with every mile. The forest seems to press in more tightly here, less like it's hiding something and more like it simply doesn't care you're there. You cross 2 creeks and a small ravine, finally emerging into a valley where a handful of rooftops break the tree line like teeth from the earth. This is Exeter, or the ghost of what it hopes to become. In 1660, Exeter isn't a town in the proud established sense. It's barely 20 years old and feels like it's still holding its breath. You're greeted by a low-fenced field, 2 oxen chewing with slow disapproval, and a boy holding a musket taller than himself. His name is Daniel. He doesn't speak as he waves you toward the center of the settlement, just squints like he's sizing you up for a future trial. You're passed from hand to hand like a letter no one wants to read, until a wiry man with a soot-streaked shirt finally takes notice. Name's Elias. He's blacksmith, baker, midwife, and constable depending on the day. He tells you Exeter was founded by John Wheelwright, a Puritan minister banished from Massachusetts for being too charismatic and possibly too lenient on the matter of grace, which, Elias mutters, meant he said God loved you even if Boston didn't. You ask if Wheelwright is still around. Elias shakes his head. Left for Maine. They say he talks to pine trees now. You're led to a longhouse used for meetings, meals, and shelter when the snow traps the valley. The air inside smells like iron and turnips. You sit among a few townsfolk eating stew from shared bowls. A woman named Mercy tells you she was born here when the only roof was the sky and the first log was still warm from the axe. We called it Exeter, she says, because naming a place is how you dare it to live. Historians still debate whether Exeter was meant to be a religious sanctuary or simply a pragmatic relocation by those too radical, too rebellious, or too restless for Massachusetts orthodoxy. What's certain is that it attracted the oddballs, the soft-spoken, the fiercely private, the ones who prayed alone and hunted together. The next morning, you walk the crude perimeter of the settlement. There's no palisade, only watchful dogs and the knowledge that everyone here carries something sharp. The Squamscott River hums nearby, brown with spring melt. A water wheel churns slowly beside the grist mill, its boards patched with driftwood and wishful thinking. Children chase chickens around the meeting house. One tells you the town saw a bear last week that walked like a man and spoke Dutch. You smile. He doesn't. In the carpenter's barn, you help raise a new beam. It groans as it's pulled upright, joints clunking into place like a tired spine. The work is hard, but the rhythm of it starts to feel familiar. Chop, lift, nail, repeat. You exchange few words with your fellow workers. In Exeter, silence is currency. You're not sure if you're earning or spending. At midday, you attend a small gathering where a man named Caleb reads a letter from a cousin in Portsmouth. It mentions a recent blizzard that buried cattle and bent the steeple of a meeting house sideways. It also says someone found a black cat nailed to the church door. No one laughs. Abigail, the herbalist, says it's a sign. Of what? She doesn't say. You visit her later. Her cottage smells like rosemary, vinegar, and something sharply floral you can't name. She shows you jars of preserved roots and wrapped bundles of bark. She gives you a charm made from a deer's tooth and nettle string. She says it keeps away fever and nosy preachers. Before you sleep that night, you're invited to the edge of the woods for what Elias calls fire talk.
There's a bonfire, crackling and hungry, and a ring of people around it sharing stories. Not sermons, not confessions, just tales. A boy who claimed he once saw lightning strike the same tree 3 nights in a row. A woman who says she buried her husband twice, the second time with a stone in his mouth because he wouldn't stay down. Someone plays a bone flute. Someone else swears they saw the aurora once, as far south as here. You lean back in the dirt and watch the sparks float upward, carrying wishes or regrets or both. Later, you lie in a loft beside a wall of drying herbs and stare at the rafters. The boards above you shift gently with wind. Outside, a fox screams like a woman. Inside, nothing moves. Exeter, for all its rough edges, feels older than it should, as if the trees here remember something. You dream of them walking at night, roots unlacing from the earth, branches stretching toward the moon. In the morning, Elias offers you a tool belt made of braided rope and leather. He says, not for fighting, for fixing. You nod. It's the most hopeful thing anyone has given you so far. You step out into the damp grass, adjust your pack, and glance back only once. The boy with the musket is still there, still watching. You nod. He does not nod back.
You follow a deer path west out of Exeter, deeper into the folds of land where New Hampshire forgets to end and the edge of Massachusetts starts thinking about beginning. The canopy thickens until light filters in like gauze. Your boots sink in moss, slide on slick roots. Every noise feels louder here, as if the forest has been quiet too long and resents the interruption. Your destination is Haverhill, though no signs point to it. In 1660 is little more than a cluster of stubborn homes along the Merrimack River, balanced between ambition and fear. Founded just a few decades prior, Haverhill is part farming outpost, part military lookout, part prayer experiment. The first settlers arrived thinking they were safe from both native attack and Puritan suspicion. But like most dreams in New England, that security cracked the moment it touched reality. You emerge from the woods near a clearing where smoke spirals from a low chimney. The house looks temporary, but lived in. Split logs, earth-packed seams, a roof weighted with stones to resist wind. A woman tending a pot over fire waves without breaking her rhythm. You approach. She points toward the river and says, "That way. You'll smell the soap before you see the people." She's right. The town's laundry day is in full force. White linens flap like ghosts on every line, and the air smells of lye and wood ash. You pass a man yelling at a goat, and 2 children reenacting a sermon, complete with scolding finger-wagging and mock repentance. Their parents pretend not to notice. Haverhill runs along the river like a sentence that never quite finds its punctuation. On one side, crude homes and half-planted fields. On the other, dense trees that could hide anything or nothing. The settlers here live with their backs to uncertainty. They have a small watchtower, a few sentries, and a lot of stories. You meet the town minister, Reverend Ward. He's younger than you expected, with ink-stained fingers and a voice that always sounds like it's about to laugh. He invites you to dinner, which consists of boiled corn, hard bread, and something he swears used to be rabbit. You don't ask questions. As you eat, Ward tells you about the Watchers, a group of town volunteers who patrol the woods at night. Not soldiers, just farmers and weavers with lanterns and nerves of varying durability. They claim to see movement in the trees, odd lights, even singing. Historians still debate whether these sightings were exaggerations, hallucinations, or real encounters with displaced native scouts, he says, sipping thin cider. But the Watchers, they're not debating anything. You spend the night in the corner of a barn next to a pile of dried corn husks. It's warmer than it looks, and the animals seem used to sharing. Just before sleep, a cow exhales loudly, and you take it as a blessing. In the morning, the town gathers for a communal clearing of an old trail. You're handed a spade and pointed toward a tangle of roots and brambles. No ceremony, no small talk, just shared sweat and the occasional joke shouted across the brush.
This is what unity looks like, says a man with a nose like a compass point. Misery with a goal. At midday, you take a break near the river. The water moves fast here, carving into the bank with purpose. You spot a group of teenagers skipping stones, while an elder carves something into a long plank of pine. He tells you it's for a new ferry, but the pattern looks more ceremonial than functional. Symbols you don't recognize, etched with care. He mentions the recent death of a young man, drowned during the storm. They never found the body, only his hat snagged on a low branch miles downstream. Some in town believe the river took him on purpose, a kind of old justice for a broken promise. No one will tell you what the promise was. That evening, there's a gathering at the watchtower. Not a sermon, but a reading pages of a letter from Boston warning of rising tensions, rumors of war, and renewed discussions about taxation. The words carry across the dark, but they feel far away. Here, the real threat isn't politics, is weather, wolves, and whatever moves in the trees after midnight. Before you leave, Reverend Ward hands you a folded slip of paper. On it, a passage from the Psalms written in neat hand. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. Below it, one line in Latin. Si vis pacem, para aratrum. You translate it slowly. If you want pace, prepare the plow. You nod, he nods back. You step onto the trail that follows the Merrimack southward. The river is always in view, sometimes just a shimmer through leaves, sometimes loud and wild beside your path. The land is more open now. The forest is less dense, but that doesn't mean it's safer. As you walk, a hawk circles above, tracing spirals in the air. Your pack feels lighter today. Maybe it's the bread you ate, maybe the company, or maybe you're just getting used to the weight of being nowhere in particular, moving through a land that's still trying to become itself. The trees ahead part, revealing the faint outline of the next settlement. You adjust your coat, grip your walking stick, and continue. The forest closes behind you.
The path into Andover feels unusually deliberate, as if someone took the time to smooth the ridges, mark the bends, and whisper to the underbrush to behave. After the wildness of Haverhill, this is almost unsettling. You pass through a gentle valley dotted with wooden posts, strung with faded rope, old boundary markers maybe, or warnings, no one around to ask. But you hear hammering somewhere ahead, so you follow the sound. The town of Andover in 1660 is in full swing, if you can call it that. A modest collection of homes with steep pitched roofs, a meeting house that leans just slightly to the left, and a collection of smoke columns curling upward like slow-spoken prayers. There's a well in the center, a tannery to one side, and children drawing with sticks in the mud beside it. They stop and stare at you. One points, the others nod solemnly. You're not sure whether to wave or repent. A man named Josiah finds you soon enough. He's the town clerk, an amateur historian, and part-time shepherd, depending on which day you ask. Today, he's covered in charcoal dust from mapping the new grave plots. We're not dying faster, he says, just finally organizing it. He walks you through the village, pointing out the family names carved into door lintels: Farnham, Holt, Barker, Abbott. We build here with memory, he says, because if we don't, this place turns back into forest faster than you believe. You attend Sunday meeting in a barn while the church undergoes repairs. The minister speaks softly, leaning into every word as if afraid they might break. He preaches against pride, vanity, and, interestingly, overcooked porridge. You nod gravely along with the congregation. You've had that porridge. You understand. At supper, you're seated with the Carters, a family of 6 plus 2 cousins and a grandmother who speaks only to the family dog. The meal is bread, boiled greens, and something called pompion pudding that tastes like despair and nutmeg. You chew politely. They talk politics, whether the king will return, whether the colonies will be fined for their independence, whether horses can sense earthquakes. You chime in on the last one. The room falls silent. Apparently that was a joke only the dog appreciated. Later,
You sit with Josiah as he transcribes notes by candlelight. He's compiling a history of the town, a record not just of births and marriages, but arguments, run-ins with bears, sightings of northern lights, and one mysterious event involving ducks and a fire. You don't ask for details. Historians still debate whether small towns like Andover were truly democratic microcosms of a future republic, or simply tightly wound survival pods kept functional through shared trauma and seasonal urgency. Josiah has his own theory. We're just people trying to be remembered without being blamed. You visit the sawmilling next morning where two men with identical beards argue about the best way to fell a pine. One insists the moon matters. The other says it's about the mood of the tree. They ask your opinion. You pretend to hear a hawk and walk away. Near the river, a group of teenagers rehearse a play about King David. One of them plays Goliath using a hollow log for a helmet. Another trips on a rock and they all collapse in laughter. It's the most joy you've seen in weeks, and for a moment you forget how hard everything else is. Before you leave, you attend a debate. Informal but lively, about whether the town should build a second grain store before winter. One woman says yes, quoting scripture. One man says no, quoting rats. Someone suggests building a bigger rat. Laughter spreads. The vote is delayed. That night, the stars appear like a spill of powdered chalk. You sit outside the barn where you're staying, listening to an owl complain somewhere in the trees. Josiah joins you with a jug of cider and a long silence. We're not meant to last, he says finally, gesturing toward the horizon, but we're meant to matter, even if it's just for a season, even if it's just to someone who walks through here 100 years from now and finds our initials in a beam. You sip the cider and nod. Andover isn't flashy, it's not tragic or heroic, but it feels deeply human. Maybe that's enough. In the morning, you lace your boots, pack your satchel, and step once more onto the path. You look back only once. A girl is waving. You don't know her name. You wave anyway. The forest rises to meet you again. The trail bends and curls and finally dissolves into soft undergrowth and birdsong. And just like that, your journey through the lost colonies of 1660s New England is complete.
You're still walking in your mind, aren't you? The trees part slowly, letting shafts of late afternoon light touch your shoulders. The river's voice fades behind you, replaced by the whisper of grass, the occasional crack of a twig. Your pack doesn't feel heavy anymore. Your footsteps have their own rhythm, now steady, quiet, familiar. Each town you pass lingers like the scent of wood smoke in your coat. Salem's tight streets and anxious eyes, Dover's muddy resolve, Exeter's strange faith in beginnings, Haverhill's watchful woods, Andover's gentle stubbornness. They all felt different, but each held something in common. People trying, against odds and weather and time, to make something real in a land that kept shifting beneath them. You picture the fading outlines of homes, the curled edge of parchment maps, the last echoes of sermons in barns and log halls. You see hands raising beams, eyes watching tree lines, mouths whispering prayers and stories around flickering flames. They didn't know you were coming, but they were ready. And now your body has slowed, your breath softens. You can almost feel the hayloft's warmth, the weight of a wool blanket, the smell of pine sap and ash. You lie back, letting your muscles remember the trail. You hear nothing but wind in the branches. You see nothing but stars. You made it through the Lost Colonies, my friend, somehow. Now rest. Close your eyes. Sweep like a settler who made it home before the snow.